I'm Marjorie Healy, and welcome to another episode of Behind the White Picket Fence, where life is both messy and beautiful. Today I have on Dawn. Dawn is a registered social worker and a yoga instructor. She's living in Port Moody, BC, where she has her private practice and a yoga studio. Dawn runs multiple programs, one of which is Resilient Kids and Resilient Teens. So I am welcoming Dawn here today to talk to us about resilience for our kids, something that is a hot topic, and I can't wait to learn from this amazing woman. So welcome, Dawn.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here. And I love sharing and talking about building resilience in little ones.
Yeah, I think it's something that we forget. I always talk to parents about what are the traits that make up our children and how can we grow those so that as they go along in the world, they can navigate all the different things coming their way. And I think we often focus on what our kids accomplish versus who our kids are. So I'm so excited to dive into this topic. So I won't make our listeners wait any longer. I am just going to dive right in and I'm going to ask you, what is something you can share with parents that will help them grow their own children's resilient nature?
I would say the biggest thing is challenging them, finding that discomfort in a safe way. Giving them opportunities for adversity and moving through those. Failure is a word that we don't like with kids, of course, but giving them opportunities, and I'll put failure in quotes because there's so much learning that comes with that. And so giving them those learning opportunities through that discomfort, through adversity, whether it's team sports, an opportunity to lose, or something where they're not able to complete a task and need to ask for help. Sometimes we want to protect kids. We want to protect them from these adversities, but supporting them. So not leaving them on their own either, but supporting them through these adversities so that they can build that resilience is so, so powerful.
Yeah, I think you make such a great point. And I think we're so afraid to let our kids, and I will also put it in quotes, let our kids fail. But isn't that where all the learning is?
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So letting them be a little bit uncomfortable in in those opportunities is where we build a lot of resilience, is through that adversity and through that discomfort.
Right. And then doesn't that give them the freedom to try something that they may or may not in that moment be successful right away at it?
And that goes to what you said. I love what you mentioned around we often look at our kids' accomplishments rather than who they are. So if we're very focused on those accomplishments instead of the process, the journey, the learning, we have kids who really just want to focus on what they're good at because that's the accomplishment, instead of trying things and saying, well, I'm not very good at this, and that's okay because I'm learning, I'm having fun, I'm growing, and I'm a little bit uncomfortable.
Right, right. I really love that. I think that we need to let them play in the journey and to let that discomfort happen. And I think we do want to protect them because we know that discomfort feels icky and we're hoping, oh gosh, I don't want my children to feel that way. And yet that is where they shift and grow and strengthen their muscles around, okay, I didn't get this right now, but I can keep trying and I will get it, or I will learn something along the way. So that's
100%.
excellent. Yeah, it's so good. Okay, so you mentioned when we were chatting about doing this podcast and I connected with you and we talked about, every kid having these unique strengths because you come across a lot of different children and teens as you're teaching this program. So talk to me about that and how we can use that to build this muscle or build this skill for children.
Yeah, so going back to giving that discomfort, that adversity in resilient kids, we like to find challenges that might be difficult for them, but draw on their strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So if one child is very physically capable, then maybe we come up with something, but maybe they have some emotional dysregulation. So let's come up with something that draws on those strengths, that brings out those superpowers, and then tie in something that's going to challenge them a little bit on maybe that emotional side, or flip that around. They might be so emotionally resilient and physically challenged. So we might say, let's go climb some trees and see how that goes.
Mhm.
And yeah, just give them those opportunities to use their superpowers to move through those discomfort, those adversities. And each child is so unique. So when we develop our programs, we don't want to just make a standard program for every child. When I run the camps, it's really the first day is really just like almost an assessment period of seeing what everyone's superpowers are,
Right.
finding those strengths, and then developing activities and programs that are going to build on those strengths, but also challenge them as well. So as parents, finding out what your child's strengths are, and in the school system, it's very, um, the curriculum is very set. You're good at math, you're not good at French, period. So, what are the strengths that you have going into that French class where you might be challenged? How can you find out what those strengths are to build that resilience to continue on with something that you might not be as strong at? So when we, identify our kids' superpowers, and with all the advertising for my programs, I always use stock images of superhero children, because I really do believe that each child, each teen, each adult has these amazing superpowers. And when we get to know them, we can continue to build on them and use those to move through those adversities.
Right. And remind them too, that you do have these strengths that are buildable strengths. It's interesting. You made a comment, and I just wanted to go a little bit deeper. You said there's the mental superpower, a physical superpower. Can you touch a little bit more on that to expand? Because I think that's really important to recognize that sometimes we're good at something physically, but it might not mean that we're good at something emotionally.
Yeah. Oh, I have such a fantastic example. I have this little guy, I think he's in kindergarten or grade 1, that comes to programs, and right away when he wanted to learn headstands. Not something I necessarily teach in the first class, but that's what he wanted to learn, so that's fine. Um, and he wasn't able to do it because it's hard to do the first time. That's
Right,
normal.
right.
And so he dysregulated. He started crying, screaming. Some suicidal words even came out. This is like a 5 or 6 year old. And then I taught him some breathing exercises, and I could tell he was a physically capable child. Like, he had great muscle tone, good core strength for a little 5 or 6 year old. I knew he could do a headstand, but his emotional dysregulation was getting in the way of doing that. So
Mm,
we kind of worked on the emotional side, like, let's calm down, let's take some deep breaths. And then he could do a headstand. And
mm,
so he's been coming each week working on his headstands. And one of the teachers at school overheard him telling someone, you should try yoga. You just have to go slow. You have to take your time. So that's, a perfect example of, okay, so he's got this physical strength, but when trying something new, his emotional dysregulation is preventing him from succeeding in physical
right.
strength. So if we let him just have a meltdown and say, I can't do headstands, forget this, I'm worthless, this isn't useful. But instead we slowed things down, worked on some emotional regulation, and now he loves doing headstands. It's like his favorite thing now.
It's amazing. That is a great, I love examples because I think that really highlights that piece of your emotions can sometimes hijack you or stand in the way of you accomplishing something that you can physically or mentally are capable of doing. And
Yes.
we see this in the school system all the time, with especially in academics, where someone sees a question, for example, that scares them, or that they feel they might not know the answer, they can right away go to emotional dysregulation. And I love how you helped him break that down and taught him those skills. How do you deal with that piece? And therefore, you can shine in your capabilities in other ways that you have already at your disposal. It's amazing. I really love that.
And that's, it's sort of how the Resilient Kids program grew from just being just yoga. There's no such thing as just yoga, but how we use yoga as a tool. And this can be done with any type of movement. It can be done with any activity, but we use, as a therapist, as a social worker, I'm using yoga as a tool to help manage that, emotional dysregulation, build that resilience. So instead of working on a one-to-one in a therapy setting with kids, I'm, using a yoga class as an opportunity to build that resilience.
Oh, I love it, Dawn. I really love it. I think there's not enough of you out there. And I said that too when we first met, and you explained all the things you were doing. And I said, how do you replicate yourself? And it's challenging. So we're just going to absorb and learn from you today, because I think your information is it's so powerful. And I think parents need to hear and learn and recognize. And you said it perfectly. It's not just a yoga class. It's never just a yoga class. And I think that could be applied to everything. It's also never just a math class. There's so many opportunities to grow who you are inside of those experiences. Okay, so let's go to something. So that now that we've kind of broken into that barrier, you also talked about what does it look like to actively listen to our kids, to help them and support them through building resilience. Because you talked about active listening, and I have to preface it with I have 4 rules of connection, and I won't go through them all now, but one of them is listening, but not listening in the way for the words, truly listening for all the things that we don't say, all the things that while we're speaking there's layers underneath the words. And I say, listen for the feeling if we're actively listening for the feeling. But teach me, tell me, share with me what active listening looks like when we're building resilience.
And I'm going to go back to what you said around often we focus on the accomplishments rather than who the kids are. So when we think about active listening in that way, we think about, a child comes home and they got an A on a test. They scored a hat trick in hockey. These types of things. We're just like, yes, that's amazing. But because we're excited, wow, a hat trick in hockey, that's so awesome, right? But when we dial it back, how did you feel? Tell me a little bit about how that felt getting the hat trick. What did you feel in your body? How did your team celebrate that? How did it feel to get the A? And what's interesting is often kids who get an A will say, well, I still got a few questions wrong. So we are so excited that, hey, you got an A, but their internal dialogue might be, but it wasn't an A plus. It wasn't perfect. But when we're actively listening, instead of focusing on that, like, oh, you got an A, that's great, good job, shutting down that opportunity for them to share. Actually, I really struggled with this assignment. I'm surprised I got an A, or I'm beating myself up inside because I got a few questions wrong.
Right.
So that active listening is pulling that out, and the words just, how do you feel? How did that feel? Tell me more about that. Open-ended questions instead of yes or no, or imposing our values of an A. That's fantastic. Oh, how do you feel about that A? Without celebrating it right away. How do you feel about that hat trick? And pulling that back and creating space for the child to share is active listening without imposing our, of course, we're excited about A's and hat tricks and these things. Of course, accomplishments to be celebrated. But let's talk about the journey a little bit through those open-ended questions.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because people who know me know that I am all about the feelings. It is my whole being. I when I get into a room, I am not analyzing the room, but I'm just trying to pick up on how everyone's feeling in the room and the energy of the room. And it's my favorite question, which you just highlighted when I'm coaching with a client, when I'm working with a parent or with a youth, is tell me more about that. And it's such a beautiful question because it's so unassuming. It tells them that I'm not just going to guess how you feel about that A or how you feel about that hat trick. I think that is amazing and what an opportunity. And I'm so glad you got to experience that. But I also want to know all about it. So, and I love how that question's tied to learning more about your child, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
and getting to know them in a deeper way. And then also gaining and building on their resiliency to say, okay, well, maybe I did accomplish that and I'm happy about that piece, but maybe I want to see what's next for me or where I can build on that skill, whether that's emotionally or actually physically. So it's interesting. Yeah, I love it. Okay, so tell me this. I'm going to ask you one more question. And yet, I think this is a big question. So there'll be some good content here. Talk to me about movement and how that piece that, when you talk about your classes and how you said it's never just a yoga class. How does the actual movement relate to resiliency, and what do you do in your programs to grow that? I think earlier we talked about movement and fresh air as two big pieces of helping children become, versions the best version of themselves. So can you expand on that for me?
Absolutely. So my Resilient Kids programs, especially the longer ones, the full day camps or workshops, are called Movement and Mindfulness.
Mm.
And we just had one yesterday. It was 2 hours long, and a little boy said, "I want to come every single day." And the mom said, "But I thought you didn't want to come to yoga." He said, "Well, I thought we were just going to do yoga poses for 2 hours." It's like, no, no, no. We're going to build resilience. So we went outside. We did some movement. We found a slack line to work on some balance. We ran around. So all of these things, when we think about how do we feel after we get some movement, especially outdoors, but indoors as well? How does that make us feel? And we know there's like a million studies out there on the benefits of movement and fresh air for our mental health. Why wouldn't we want to share those with our young people, right? So we often think about for ourselves, like, I need to get outside for a walk. I need to do these things. But our young people, we don't want to just leave that to recess. Can we incorporate movement and fresh air? Can we take them out with the dog? Can we take them out gardening with us? Can we do these things? There's a million studies on the mental health benefits, but also the academic benefits. So the physical literacy things that we do in yoga, learning to stand on one leg, learning to do a headstand, or at the camps when we're climbing trees, these all enhance our physical literacy. Things like skipping, balancing. This helps grow part of our brain that's actually going to be helping us with school, with literacy in school, reading and writing. So, and I love what you had said when we were chatting around, we think about if we need to work on literacy, a pen and paper. But actually, if we can grow our brains through physical literacy, we are giving kids those tools and that foundation to be able to pick up that pencil.
Right. And I think you touched on a good point, because from very early on in the educational system, we're told, expose your kids to literacy, expose your kids to books. And that's great. And I think many parents do that. They read, often before bedtime, we read with our children, or we look through recipe books with our children, or we read road signs. There's lots of ways to actually enhance literacy, but I don't think we think about movement and how it's directly tied to enhancing a child's capability to learn and to read and write in the classroom. I think we look at that as completely separate. And yet the studies, you had even said this, the studies show that movement, especially outdoor movement, does do that for children. So I love that you do that. And I think that it's important that we educate and talk to parents about that piece, that we don't just see academics as strictly within the walls of a school system with a pen and paper.
Yeah. And we are fortunate or unfortunate living in the lower mainland. We have so much rain. And so, what an opportunity to find that discomfort to, so often it's like, oh, it's raining. It's raining right now. I don't want to go outside, but I'm safe. And so, I always will also say to kids, you're safe. And so, I use that word a lot, you're safe. And I hear kids reflect that back. The studio is very safe. I feel safe here. But we do go outside in the rain, and that is uncomfortable. It's cold, it's wet, it doesn't feel good, but we know we're safe. And so when I hear a child saying, like, I'm cold, I'm wet, oh, we've got warm blankets at the studio, so we're going to go back soon, but let's play this game. So that we're not just saying, oh, it's raining, we're going to stay inside. We're going to face that discomfort, but know that we're safe and that we're going to come back to comfort, because we want to get in that movement. We want to get in that fresh air despite the rain. So we have this beautiful opportunity. I struggle to call it beautiful, but this opportunity to face that discomfort and that adversity and get in that outdoor movement and fresh air, and then come back inside, wrap ourselves in a warm blanket, take off our wet socks, things like that. So what a practical opportunity to face adversity, to be uncomfortable, and to get in that movement and mindfulness and that fresh air all at once.
It's beautiful. And I think we always learn in those situations just how capable we are. It's exactly those environments that we find out, oh, actually, we are capable of these things. And the human spirit is capable of so much, but it's growing the fact that we believe we are capable of so much,
Yeah.
which I love.
I have
Okay,
a
so
funny,
yeah.
I have a funny story about one of my camps. A child didn't have an extra pair of socks or shoes. It was winter, it was rainy, and her feet were wet. And it was like, okay, that's uncomfortable because we were going back outside. So I did what we did as a child of the 80s, where I got some cloths and Ziploc bags and elastics, put them on her feet, put them back in the wet boots. And I was like, this is what we did in the 80s. And she was like, what? I just don't want to go outside. I was like, oh no, this is what we did when I grew up. We put, a dry cloth, a plastic bag, and an elastic around her ankles and put them back in her wet boots and
And
went
off
back
we
outside.
went. And
Yeah.
we
And then
just, and did
her
she,
mom
was she
thought it was
okay?
hilarious. She thought it was hilarious afterwards because it worked. So at first she was like, what are you doing? And I was like, don't worry, this is what we did in the 80s. It works.
We're going to be okay. I think we need a little more 80s in today's lives. I think that's the problem. We really did grow up at a time where we were more free to fail and play and be open to exploration and without so much protection on
Yeah.
so many levels, and that grew us to be resilient. And maybe today one of the, not mistakes, because I think no one's intentionally not trying to do the best that they can do, but I think that we've coddled a little bit. And one of my favorite psychologists that I've come across in working in this field said to me, Marjorie, we need to prepare over protect. And I think that line has never left me. And I think that's what you're speaking to. It's okay. We can make these new boots with some interesting materials. We can get creative, and we can prepare you to get back out there and get into some other, maybe something else uncomfortable will come along, but we now know that in a supportive way you can do this, and we can take you there.
And when I train my staff, it's all safety, safety, safety. So I don't feel safe sending a kid out with wet socks and wet boots because they could get sick. That doesn't feel right. I don't want them to get a cold or flu or, just be
Right.
that uncomfortable. So the plastic bag with the cloth with the elastics, they're safe. Their feet are dry. It's bizarre, right? It's a little bit,
Yeah.
having elastic bands on your ankles isn't super comfortable, but it's safe. So I always come back to, is this safe? Can we push the edge of discomfort, but still stay within that place of safety? So we're not, we never would put a child in an unsafe situation, but we want to test that edge where they're totally safe. So our programs, we do take little ones as young as 5 on public transit, but we have enhanced staff numbers. We want to make sure that there's one adult to hold every 2 kids' hands, things like that. So we want to make sure that they're safe, but it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit scary.
Right.
Once there was a jam with the buses in North Vancouver and they were delayed like an hour and stuff. That is uncomfortable, but we were safe. So
Yeah.
we're always, pushing that edge to build resilience where it's uncomfortable, but we're safe.
But in safe ways. I love that. I think that will give parents a little bit of freedom to do just that, to know, if I look at it from a safety point of view, can I push the envelope, or where can I push the envelope, knowing that I've checked off the boxes of safety. Because I luckily I have twins, so they started taking the bus together, but there's safety in numbers, so I knew they were safe. And yet for some parents who saw my children at the bus stop, they were a little bit alarmed that I was letting them take the bus. I think they were 12 when I started doing this with them, and I took them through a dry run, and then I said, okay, you can do, where the bus stop is, and you have each other. And they were great. They figured it out. And I did get a few calls sometimes from cell phone numbers I didn't recognize, because they were also resourceful. They knew to ask for a telephone if they needed me. And so I like the idea of looking at, are they safe, and then we can push from there, and then they can grow their wings and see their own superpowers. right, in real time, in their own experiences in beautiful ways.
Imagine being a 12-year-old taking the bus on your own. How empowering. How amazing does that feel to be like, I can take the bus on my own. I can go wherever I want. Hopefully, they're not going wherever they want, but you know what I mean? They
Yeah,
have that independence and that opportunity to, yeah. And it's uncomfortable. Taking the bus isn't comfortable for any of us. It's not a preferred way, but it's
right.
what a great way to build that independence. And then who knows what grows out of that, interest in travel, interest in just that independence of, I can take myself out if I want to.
Exactly. That I'm a little bit free, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, especially when you're young, when your parents are sort of not controlling, but it's regulating
protecting them.
most of their, yeah, or protecting their lives. So it does give them this freedom, this newfound freedom. Okay, I mean, we could just go on and on and on. And we did dive into it when we set up for this podcast. We talked a little bit about nutrition as well. It's up to you. Did you want to dip into nutrition really quickly, knowing that we'll do another podcast that it goes deeper into this topic? But could you maybe give us a taste, I'm going to play on words, a taste of
I love
how
that.
nutrition would impact resiliency. And then we'll wrap up and knowing that we're going to give our audiences more information in this space.
Absolutely. And I mentioned connecting you with a holistic nutritionist that I work with at the studio who's fantastic. Um, but as a therapist working in mental health, I was definitely like, mind blown about learning that our gut actually produces over 80% of our serotonin. So when we think about SSRIs, which are antidepressants, you know, we can get serotonin by balancing our gut health, and that's just not for adults. So when we look at nutrition, if we really want to set kids up with that resilience to have their best mental health, having a look at the nutrition and connecting with a nutritionist, looking at how can I help my little one balance their gut health to give them those foundations. We know there's a strong link with academics as well with nutrition. That's where breakfast programs came out of and things like that. So yeah, so it's, all of those things that we think about for our own mental health, movement, fresh air, nutrition, these are so important and so foundational for little ones and building resilience.
Right. And I think you said something really powerful to me, and that was off the air, and I hope I'm okay to repeat it. You said you can sort of tell which children are going to regulate better within your programs based on what you see in their lunch, which I thought was such a powerful statement coming from you. You're a social worker, you're a counselor, you've had an incredible experience in this area. And yet, you can open up a child's lunch and say, oh, this child's going to be less likely to dysregulate than another child. And I'm not saying any shame or blame on packing lunches. As a mom of three boys, I've packed a million lunches, and some were winners and some were zingers. They were not good. So, that comment is interesting, but I think it points to just how powerful nutrition is, and how focusing on that piece or spending more time on that piece is important.
Yeah, and the holistic nutritionist at the studio, her son comes to the programs. He's little, he's 5, and I don't think I've ever seen him have a meltdown. He's just so relaxed and calm. And I do think that, the lunches that she's packing him, I see them, they're just full of, you know, gut balancing foods. And they're full of, yeah, just incredible. I'm like, can you pack a lunch for me too, please?
Yes.
They look amazing. My lunches do not look like that. But
Right.
yeah, and then he's just so balanced. And I think, and that's, yeah, where I encourage you to, yeah, connect with that holistic nutritionist, because I see her child at camps, and I'm just like, wow, he's a fantastic example of resilience. And I think nutrition is one of those key building blocks. And that's something I'm interested in learning more as well. And I definitely, I follow holistic nutritionists. I'm very interested in learning more about nutrition and that role and resilience for kids and for us as adults.
Right. And myself as well. I'm excited to connect with this individual because I feel the same. And it's maybe a complete bonus of this podcast that I get to jump in and interview experts like yourself to grow my own knowledge base as well. And then it's a rippling effect, because even if someone doesn't listen to this podcast, I'll still be able to use this knowledge in my coaching practice. And therefore, we're all helping each other live our best lives and do our best work when it comes to raising a family and looking after children. So I cannot thank you enough. It's been a wonderful experience having you on. And I said to you in the very beginning of this podcast, or when we were off air chatting, that this is one of many. So thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. And I really want to reiterate what you said around that knowledge exchange and sharing information, because, raising children is a community effort. And so, like I said, I'm learning about nutrition, and I've got some skills around emotional regulation, and we can just transfer and share that knowledge amongst ourselves as a community, and really see the young people, the teens, and the children as, a community effort in sharing our knowledge, because this is, no one person's going to have all the answers. And if we're open to that learning, listening to this podcast, connecting with other people, we can share that knowledge with more people. So thank you so much for having me here and creating space for me to share some of my learnings.
Yes, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think it takes a village. We hear this all the time, and it's so true that, and I've always said that, we are not alone in this, and we shouldn't be alone in this. We should be working together. So I really do appreciate it. Okay, so we'll wrap up for today, and we'll definitely have you back on. I hope our listeners enjoyed this. And if you want to reach Dawn or learn more about our programs, can you just tell us quickly where they can go? What's the best avenue for our listeners to go to find you?
You can Google RVN Wellness, or Raven Wellness without the vowels. So RVN Wellness. It's rvnwellness.com is our website. RVN Wellness is on Instagram, Facebook, things like that. And yeah, absolutely. I'm the owner, so you can reach out with any questions. Pretty accessible. So yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Great. And when I put this out, I will put that link in the bio. All right. Thanks again, Dawn. And I hope you have a beautiful day. Stay dry or get a little wet.
Yes, have some fun. Thank you.
Okay.